Hello everyone, and welcome to another Genshin lore video. Today, I'll be going over the lore given to us through the new Unfinished Reverie artifact set. The full meaning behind this lore isn't exactly clear yet, but it will likely be expanded on more in Natlan, similar to how Nymph's Dream from version 3.6 was later expanded on in Fontaine. Also, this video does contain spoilers for the quests listed on screen now, so if you haven't done those, you have been warned. Anyways, let's move right on and get into the video. Before getting into the lore itself, I want to discuss where it fits into the timeline. Since we don't know too much about Natlan at the moment, it can be a bit tricky to pinpoint a location for the story in the timeline. However, there is one hint in this set that gives us a rough estimate as to when this story takes place. A golden tear dripping from the stone head fell into his eye, and he saw much. He spoke of the gigantic creations he saw in his stupor, of elaborate machines whirring. Based on the visions granted by this tear, this could very well be forbidden knowledge. In the cutscene that shows Deshret's past, forbidden knowledge is represented as a tear as well. As such, the events mentioned in this artifact set could very well take place around the same time as King Deshret's forbidden knowledge incident. This could also be around the time of the lore mentioned in Talking Stick, as that lore mentions a turbid black tide. We know that black tide wasn't the cataclysm, so it could have been forbidden knowledge instead. With the timeline stuff out of the way though, let's go over the story brought to us through this artifact set. During this time period, Natlan was ruled by a king who soon became a tyrant. This tyrannical king was described as a half-man, though it isn't clear what his other half would be, or if it's describing his character instead. Whatever the case, it's suggested that he wished to wipe out the Saurians, or Bishops, from Natlan. Luckily, his plans would be foiled by a group of heroes that rose up against him. First, an unnamed scarlet-eyed boy would return to Natlan from a far-off kingdom. Based on the descriptions given here, this kingdom was very likely Remuria, which would also fit the timeline. Upon returning to Natlan, he would meet an old woman who told him to seek out people who could help topple the tyrants. She describes the area as a land of death, which could potentially be referencing the Mare Javari. However, it's currently unclear if these events took place before or after the Mare Javari's formation. Either way, the scarlet-eyed boy would soon go out and find many heroes to join his cause. There was the part-bird Sakuk, who acted as a scout, the older twin Atahualpa, who had a sharp tongue, the younger twin, Huascar, who had been physically hurt by the tyrant, and the warrior Yupanchi, who wished to help save the Saurians. While this group was already strong, they needed someone with intimate knowledge of the king's city. As such, Sakuk would go out to find a rumored artisan who knew all of the passages in the city and could disarm all of its traps. At first, she was having no luck in her quest, and it appeared that the rumors weren't true. However, a drunk with half his face burned noticed the feather she wore and started to describe the origins of the pattern that adorned it. Upon hearing his words, Sakuk quickly realized that this drunk was the artisan she was looking for. The artisan told her stories of his past, including the story of an emerald-colored Quetzal who used to work for the king. Sakuk went on to explain that the Quetzal was her father, and that he had been condemned and killed for trying to defend the Saurians. Seeing the anger in her eyes, the artisan decided to join the rebellion as well. At this moment, it's suggested that he had feelings for Sakuk, but her heart belonged to the unnamed scarlet-eyed boy. With the artisan on their side, the heroes began to rally more allies against the king. Sakuk would act as a representative of the 6 original tribes, convincing them to re-ally with the Saurians. Yupanchi would use his sword to shatter the shackles that bound the neck of the Saurian. Quick side note here, this Saurian is specifically described as the Saurian, not a Saurian. Perhaps this Saurian was the Pyro Sovereign themselves, imprisoned by the Tyrannical king long ago. Anyways, the other heroes would continue their missions. Atahualpa rekindled the desire for all past glories, while Huascar stood first against the torrent of darkness. Now, the Sands piece of this set also references those who came from the canyons, hanging trees, the spring source, the fertile lands, and the mountain peaks. In my opinion, these locations could be referencing some of the tribes in Natlan. Natlan could have many different geographical areas, with each of the tribes staying in one. Only 5 were mentioned here, but Sakuk was also described as the daughter of the mines, which could very well be the 6th location. In fact, that would line up with the lore of Talking Stick, as Sanjuda, chief of the mines, was one of the heroes recruited by Tanakh to fight the incoming threat. Now then, with an abundance of allies on their side, the heroes started their open rebellion. They infiltrated the king's city, where the scarlet-eyed hero would summon the god's fiery wrath to overthrow the tyrant once and for all. The meaning behind the god's fiery wrath isn't fully clear here. He could have received a pyro vision, or could have even been blessed by the pyro archon or pyro sovereign. Whatever this power was, it helped him and his fellow heroes survive the battle. The artisan, despite being the brains behind this operation, ended up going unnamed in history. Despite this, he still gives us quite a bit more lore. After the battle, he tells the heroes about his history working under the king. In that time, he worked underground to unearth gargantuan beastly constructs that had wings, perhaps a bigger version of the ruin drakes first seen in Sumeru. As such, it seems that the tyrant was interested in Conrian technology. However, since the tyrant had already begun to go insane by this time, the artisan tried to dig up his secrets as well. Unfortunately, the tyrant found out, and he responded by burning everything and attempting to bury everyone involved in the ancient ruins. As the artisan awaited death, the golden tear I mentioned earlier dripped from a statue and fell into his eye. This tear granted him a vision, in which he saw gigantic creations, elaborate machines, and much more. Again, I believe this tear was forbidden knowledge, and that this took place around Deshret's time. The twins, Atahualpa and Huascar, thought of his story as fanciful, but he knows the truth. In fact, he saw much more than what he told the heroes about. He saw floating golden patterns, a path to escape the ruins, and the rules that were established by the empire that stretched far and wide. The empire mentioned here could very well be referencing Celestia, which would add more support for this tier being forbidden knowledge. After all, Celestia seems to want to keep their origins a secret, as seen with Urabashi and before Sun and Moon. Still though, the artisan wished to tell them all the full story once the new kingdom was established. The story then cuts to many years later, where Sakuk is the only one still alive. The scarlet-eyed hero was said to have returned to the Sacred Flames, which I believe could be Natlan's primal fire, similar to Fontaine's primordial sea. The artisan would restore the feather that Sakuk wore, but he died shortly afterwards. Sakuk would then spend years buying his many creations, including any forgeries. Eventually, she placed a circlet she made for the artisan under a tree, then took the genuine articles with her as she disappeared over the horizon. People would stand under the tree and swear an oath to follow her final orders, to blot the name of the artisan from history. With all that lore covered, there are still a few things I want to discuss a bit more. Going back to the timeline discussion real quick, I believe this story took place before the lore mentioned in Talking Stick and the formation of the Mare Javari. In the Talking Stick's lore, Saurians stood by humans, which was not the case under the Tyrant's rule. The turbid black tide may have been a resurgence of forbidden knowledge, as we know that the artisan knew about it. As for whether this resurgence was caused by the artisan's actions, we don't know just yet. Now, as I said earlier, the scarlet-eyed hero was said to have returned to the Sacred Flames. Again, I think these Sacred Flames could be Natlan's version of the primordial sea, which I like to call primal fire. The idea of returning to the Sacred Flames sounds a lot like the theme of returning to the primordial sea in Fontaine. The primal fire of Natlan could even be the fiery wrath used by the scarlet-eyed hero against the tyrant. Perhaps by using it, he became destined to return to it when his mission was complete. The primal fire could even tie into Arlecchino's power in the Crimson Moon dynasty of Conria. Being an underground nation, Conria could have been close to the source of primal fire, which could have allowed them to harness it for a time. Now then, I also want to talk about the Saurian that was freed by Yupanchi. I mentioned earlier that this could be the Pyro Sovereign, which I think would make a lot of sense. This could even be Xbalanque, who introduced Neuvillette in his official character introduction, though his choice of wording seems to imply that he isn't a sovereign himself. Whoever the sovereign is though, I think Natlan could be ruled by both an Archon and a sovereign, or at least have both present in the nation. The presence of both could even have something to do with the constant state of war that plagues Natlan. In any case, I feel like this lore will be explained in a similar way to how the lore of Nymph's Dream was explained through the Narcissan Kreis Ordo quest lines in Fontaine. We could get parts of a World Quest series released in the first few patches of Natlan that slowly explain this lore. In version 5.6, we could even visit the ruins of the Tyrant's Kingdom, similar to how we got to visit Remuria in version 4.6. Either way, I'm sure the meaning behind this lore will become a lot clearer once Natlan releases. When that time comes, I'll be sure to make updated videos on this lore. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the lore of the Unfinished Reverie artifact set. Natlan is getting closer and closer, and I can't wait to see the meaning behind this lore. If you want more lore about Natlan though, I recommend my videos on the Harbingers of Natlan, Lava Walker, and Tales of Teyvat. With that said, I would love to hear what other bits of lore you'd like me to cover in the comments below as well. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Sources and further readings are also in the description if you want to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next video.